Morning, all. So let's start off our Saturday with something different. Something that's not the usual fare for a Saturday. Normally, on any given day, really, over the last couple of months, it'd be a news of the day video. But since most of the stuff's going on, it's just minor league signings, entry level contract signings. We're going to start with a misery index. What's a misery index? Glad you asked. I did a search on the channel. It looks like I didn't do this last year. I did it 2 years ago, where I used certain numbers to factor in and decide which organization and its fan base is rightfully, in agreement that they're maybe the most miserable in the league. And so last time I showed, here's what I used as my formula to get that. I'm not doing that this time, because then that last time then it was just, well, that formula's wrong. Here's what you should have done. Here's what really should have been, and it turned into something else. So I only factored in the 2010-2011 season through the season we just finished a month ago. And so this is a countdown of the least miserable franchise all the way to the most miserable franchise. And there's fan bases that are going to go, I think I know where we're at. But you might be right. But let me do this, because it took me a while to figure this all out yesterday while I'm watching baseball games and taking mental notes on baseball games too. So, anyways, somebody saying I didn't remember that Correa hit the walk-off home run. I know Correa hit the walk-off home run. Anyway, here we go. Number 31, meaning the least miserable, is Pittsburgh. There's a reason I'm wearing Pittsburgh, because Pittsburgh, with the 2 Stanley Cup wins and some pretty strong results throughout the last decade, I can't see any reason why Penguins fans could argue, should argue, would even try to argue that they're in the land of misery. Despite the reality they haven't won a cup in 3 whole years, but still, 3 years is not a drought. That doesn't work that way. Stanley Cups don't run like water. While Pittsburgh would be probably understood and feeling like they sometimes do. But yeah, so I have them in 31st, which means 30th is Chicago. 3 Stanley Cup victories. 3 in the last decade. So why would they be ahead of Pittsburgh? Because Chicago's fallen out of the playoffs. Since 2017, when they got swept in the first round by Nashville, they've missed the playoffs in 2018, 2019. Made the playoffs in 2020 through a play-in round and then lost in round 1. So it has been a little bit more of a downtime for Chicago in recent seasons, which is why they end up higher up on the misery chart. Now, if you want to argue, well, with 3 Stanley Cups, they shouldn't be higher, go for it. Number 29, and if we're already quibbling at 30 and 31, this is going to be a long video. Number 29 is the Kings. So 2 Stanley Cups. And seeing that the Stanley Cup winners are almost all down in this area tells me that the formula I use this time is really pretty darn close. The Kings, of course, have been out of the playoffs for a while. So that would be what makes them a little bit more on the misery side than Chicago and LA, or Chicago and Pittsburgh. But LA is still close enough to their Stanley Cups that I don't qualify as real misery. 28, Vegas. So Vegas has only been in the league for 3 years. That's why they don't end up higher up on the chart. If they spend the next 7 years not winning Stanley Cups and either being eliminated early or, gosh forbid, actually end up missing the Stanley Cup playoffs at some point in time in their existence, they'll move up. But for right now, they're 28th. Keep in mind that means that points-wise, over a decade, they did finish with more points than the Kings, the Blackhawks, and the Penguins, because Stanley Cup wins subtract points. So let's say that missing the playoffs was 60 points, which it wasn't. And winning the Stanley Cup was negative 170, something like that, just using those as numbers. So no Stanley Cup wins is the reason why Vegas is where they are. If they had won a Stanley Cup, they actually would be at the bottom of this, because it's only been 3 years. Number 27, your current Stanley Cup champion, Tampa Bay Lightning. They did have a playoff miss or 2 in there. They did have the loss in the first round last year. I didn't factor in President's Trophy wins either, because that's not a reason to be miserable. We were President's Trophy winners and we lost in the first round. Oh no, you were best in the regular season. How miserable for you to have seen them win 62 games. So yeah, to me that doesn't factor in, but Yeah, they're still ahead of these guys. Now, if they win another Stanley Cup in 2021, by the point system I had, they would end up much farther down than where they're at. Number 26, also a Stanley Cup winner, the Washington Capitals. And again, seeing this on the board today, I went, yeah, this is pretty good. Capitals, of course, won it 2 years ago. The reason they would be more miserable than others, they have had a lot of failures along the way, a lot of second round losses, first round losses. This year won't make them feel any better about anything. If they don't come out next season with something to prove and with a chip on their shoulder, I don't know. It might be time to really consider a retooling of the Washington Capitals. Number 25, Boston. So there's another Stanley Cup champion, and yet Boston does miss the playoffs on occasion. Boston's seen as this juggernaut over the last decade, and they've had their moments. They were in the Stanley Cup Finals in 2013 and 2019, and they won the Cup in 2011. They also had playoff misses in between some of that. And they've had some first-round losses, and there's been some reason for misery if you're a Bruins fan above these others. 24, the last of the Stanley Cup champions on the board, St. Louis. So over the last decade, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 teams have won the Stanley Cup, which bodes well for 7 other teams to win the Stanley Cup in the next decade, I would think. Minimum of 7, probably 8 or 9. Repeating as Stanley Cup champions is difficult, as St. Louis found out this year. 1 year removed from the Stanley Cup win, and yet there's been a lot of disappointment along the way. The way they went out against Vancouver didn't make St. Louis fans happy either. So the Blues, that Stanley Cup win means they're lower down than everybody else. But of the Stanley Cup champions over the last 10 years, they are the fan base that would have the most reason to argue that it was kind of a miserable decade. Number 23, not a Stanley Cup winner, but they've been to a Stanley Cup final, and that's San Jose. Now, San Jose, if they miss another playoffs this year, and if I do this again next year, that's going to push them up the board a little bit. But for San Jose, they've been pretty consistently good. They did have the Stanley Cup final in 2016. They went to the conference final last year against St. Louis. And regardless of how they get there, and I know that's a whole other argument, the reality is San Jose, pretty good over the last decade. Really, really rough year this year, but that's after some pretty strong years they've had. Number 22 on the board, the New York Rangers. You know, the Rangers, what's interesting is we're going to find out this year, you know, whether or not Shesterkin can live up to the legend of Lundqvist. It's not easy to do that. Lundqvist, one of the best goalies ever, and one of the main reasons why the Rangers are this low on the board. The Rangers were pretty good. They managed to make the playoffs and go on little runs in the playoffs. They got to a Stanley Cup final as well. So for that reason, they didn't garner as many points as some of the other teams. They didn't win a Stanley Cup, so they're not down in here. But among the rest of the teams that didn't win a Stanley Cup, I think that misery-wise, they're 22nd. But again, the formula I use, people probably would have issues with. At 21, Nashville. So, again, we're looking at a team that gets to a Stanley Cup final in 2017. And surprisingly so that they got to that Stanley Cup final. But a team that is usually in the playoffs. A team that has become consistently one of the better teams in the league over the last decade. And so, to me, yeah, Nashville ends up at 21. So that rounds out the bottom row. If you're in this row, you're probably not that miserable about your team and probably have optimism about a return to Stanley Cups, or that maybe you'll get over the top. And if you're San Jose, the idea that maybe we can bounce back because we have had a pretty good decade. Number 20, Anaheim. A team that it feels like is still going through this rebuild process. Anaheim's recent playoff misses and some sort of shocking losses in the playoffs as well lead to some points for them and end up with them in the second row. But again, they're not that miserable, and it's only been 13 years since they won a Stanley Cup. So for Anaheim, and I know for some people watch this, but I don't remember 13 years ago. Don't make me feel older than I already do. Number 19, Minnesota. Minnesota Wild fans are going to state that this is not true, that they are far more miserable than 19th on the board. But again, with the formula that I used, they've been pretty regularly in the playoffs. And while they don't go very far in the playoffs, and again, they don't go on these long runs, they're still right around middle of the pack. This is the nightmare for every Minnesota fan, right? Just kind of middle of the pack. Not bad, not great. So this is where you're going to have your great, and up here you're going to have your bad, and they're just sort of pretty good over the last decade. Not a cup champion. Number 18, and I'm kind of surprised these guys are this high and yet not. Detroit has fallen on some hard times. Really, really hard times. If Dusty Rhodes was still around, I would imagine he would be offered a chance to do a speech at the start of every game of theirs. You have to be old enough to get that reference. I'm not going to explain it. So for Detroit at 18th, they're moving up the board, and the seasons at the start of this that gave them a pretty good push into this direction. Yeah, they've been moving in the wrong direction for years. The difference is now they've got Steve Yzerman, who it looks like should be able to bring them back to their glory. So no Stanley Cup wins to pull them down into this area. The last time I did this, of course, it was from 05-06 to 2017-2018. So Detroit, not really that high on the misery index as far as I remember the last time, because they had that Stanley Cup win. They went to the Stanley Cup Finals. In this one, that does not factor into it. Montreal is at 17. So there's a Canadian team. That's the first of the Canadian teams, isn't it? Yep. So if you're a Montreal fan, do you feel like you've had the least reason to be miserable over the last 10 years? Probably not. But they have had some good runs. They've been pretty strong. They do miss the playoffs on occasion, but they've had some really good years as well. Scored the odd upset here and there between 2011 and 2020. Pretty decent all-around team. We can all debate Bergevin at another time, but pretty decent all-around team. Number 16 is Philadelphia. The Flyers, an up-and-down team. Really, really good some years, iffy others. This does not take into account the 2010 run to the Stanley Cup Final. But again, they do well enough on occasion that they end up at 16th, but more miserable than about half of the league. So if you wake up and you're a Flyers fan and you look out the window and you think, I think I'm more miserable than about 14 other fan bases, this would prove that you're right. So Philadelphia right around the halfway mark. So you can pause and take a stretch and walk around the room, and they don't do that. All right. You just skip to the end anyways, right? That's pretty much all people do. Number 15, Dallas. Dallas's run to the finals this year keeps them from being a lot higher on this board. The question I have with Dallas is how reliable is that run to the finals? Like, are they going to be able to replicate it in 2020, 2021? I really don't know. I have my doubts because, again, you know, the players are going to change. You still have a team that tends to have the highest paid players not play the best hockey, and that's a dangerous combination. So, yeah, Dallas at 15, it's about right. More miserable than 16 other teams. Seems about right. At 14, the New York Islanders. The Islanders are getting better, so you get the feeling that the next time I do this, the Islanders, in terms of misery, should be lower down the board because Barry Trotz wills them to be better than they probably have any right being. And Lou Lamoriello's done a good job. So while the debate could be out there about whether or not Lou Lamoriello's done a good job, he has, because we can't point out any major mistakes he's made since he took over with the Islanders. We can point out major mistakes made by most GMs. Because as armchair GMs, we don't have to worry about the weird, crazy, ridiculous trade rumors we throw out there to have any chance of actually happening. So you can trade all kinds of guys and then, 3 years later say, well, yeah, but, if I was the GM, well, wait, remember that rumor that you wanted to put out there? Remember that time that you had a trade proposal? Remember that? I'm not the GM. Oh, okay, all right. So, yeah, the Islanders are on the right track now, and we'll see whether or not they stay that way. I think they will. At 13 is Columbus. So one thing that makes Columbus less miserable than others, they consistently now are making the playoffs. One thing that makes them more miserable than others is they don't go very far in the playoffs. So again, you end up around the halfway mark, a little above the halfway mark on the misery index. And not having won a Stanley Cup starts to become a factor. No Stanley Cups here, no Stanley Cups here, none here, none here. So, and of course, all your champions. There aren't any in Vegas, but that's just greedy, expecting one in Vegas by year 3. Number 12, Ottawa. I know it's going to feel like Ottawa's been miserable for a while because the last 3 years have been rough. But in the years prior to that, over the last decade, not too bad for Ottawa, so it keeps them out of the top row. Again, the recent seasons bump them up further and further than these other teams, and that is your second Canadian team. It is alarming how high the Canadian teams are on the misery index in general, and somewhat unsettling because as a hockey fan that now says, you know what, I'd like to see a Canadian team win a Stanley Cup. Can we see that, please? These results tell me probably not. Number 11, Colorado. I would expect next year, Colorado does one of two things. Either they end up in the conference final or Stanley Cup final and win a Stanley Cup. I think Colorado's that good. With the blue line they have, they're that good. It's going to come down to whether or not Grubauer can stay healthy for a full run. I think Grubauer's good enough. It's just he has to stay healthy. If Grubauer had stayed healthy this year, who knows what might have happened. Against the Dallas Stars, there were some lucky bounces here and there, and Hutchinson got a couple wins against them. So, Colorado has good reason to be optimistic about the future, and they end up here because during parts of this decade they were miserably bad. But they're not that anymore, and so it keeps them out of the top row. So 10 teams in the top row. I got 1, 2, 4, 5. Yeah, still 5 Canadian teams. So a lot of Canadian content in the top 10. Starting with number 10 being Winnipeg. No Stanley Cups in their history. It doesn't matter whether you're saying, well, the history they took to Arizona. You had no Stanley Cups there either. It's been rough, and we're getting to that point where they've made the right moves, I think, to get back into contention. And if they don't, I do wonder how much more patience are Jets fans going to have with the process before they start to get kind of ornery about either Cheveldayoff or Maurice a little more than they are now. I know Cheveldayoff every now and then takes a little flack, but Maurice does get a lot of heat when they're struggling. I do wonder if this fails, if Stastny fails, do Jets fans start to say, maybe we need a new GM, especially if they trade out Line A and they don't get back a very good return. That could all add up. Number 9, another Canadian team, Vancouver. So Vancouver's top 10, which is accurate. I looked at these standings last night and I went, yeah, that's about it. So Vancouver, remember 2011, you're looking at the last year that they went to the Stanley Cup final. Right up until this year where they lose in round 2 against the Vegas Golden Knights. And so the overall result of this is that Vancouver over the last decade has had a rough time of it. No way around it. And the misery, if not for 2011, if I took that year out, they'd be higher up on the board. Because at number 8, also Canadian, is Calgary. Calgary's had a rough time of it as well. Finally, last year, they finished first in the West for the first time in decades, and then they lose in round 1 against the Colorado Avalanche. And then this year, they lose in round 1 against the Dallas Stars. So, a lot of reasons to be kind of ticked off if you're a Calgary fan right now. But again, there's hope. There's hope that maybe Calgary becomes that team to win it. The Markstrom contracts being dissected, the Tanev contracts being dissected, but in general, Calgary ends up in the top 10, and we'll see whether or not a cup win could perhaps drop them down really quickly. Number 7, Carolina. I like Carolina. I do. I would like to see this team win another one. Spent a long time outside the playoffs. That's why they're at number 7. They spent a lot of this decade out of the playoffs. Right up until 2019. So if not for 2019 and 2020, they'd be higher up. But the last 2 years have helped to pull them down at least a little bit. And their fans can be a little bit happier with the direction things are headed. Really good young core for them. We'll see where it goes. Number 6, the Devils. And New Jersey fans are like, yeah, that's about right. Right? This board to me, I'm like, yeah, this is accurate. So New Jersey went to the Stanley Cup final in 2012. And then it's just all fallen apart ever since then. And that 2012 run, it felt like that was kind of a last gasp an attempt to get a last Stanley Cup from Marty Brodeur, and it didn't work. And now the Devils have been kind of mired near the bottom of the league for a long time since. So we'll see next 10 years whether or not that changes. I think it does. I don't see how getting so many quality draft picks, they don't end up moving their way up. Number 5, Arizona. Yeah, again, not much argument with Arizona being towards the top of a misery index, right? The Coyotes, you got to make the playoffs. You need to make the playoffs in order to not be high up on the misery index. And then for the Coyotes as well, they haven't gone on a run since the last time they were in the playoffs, like officially. I mean, they won the play-in round this year, so technically they're in, but, they were a lower seed. This year was just different. So in terms of being top 8 in their conference, they hadn't done that since 2012. Maybe they're building in the right direction, but losing Taylor Hall and some of the other moves that have been made, who knows? Who knows where Arizona's headed? Don't say Houston. Come on, you guys are better than that. Don't say that. So I don't know. I think Arizona, with now proper ownership, things should get better. Number 4, it is the Toronto Maple Leafs. It just feels like it's the most miserable for Toronto. Now, the amount of time it's been since the last Stanley Cup, it really pushes Toronto up. It really, really does. Pushes them up this list pretty high. And that is one of the overriding stories with Toronto. And not getting out of the first round doesn't help. So the playoff appearances are nice, but you want something to show for it. And for Toronto, they just haven't had anything to show for it. So the pressure is on Toronto. I'm doing a pressure power rankings as well. And Toronto's near the top of that one. But I have them on the misery index at 4. I think that's pretty accurate. Because at 3, Florida. I'm going with the little, I know that one's smaller than the others, but I like that logo, and I wanted to use that logo for this board. Florida hasn't won a round since right about when this was made. This sticker set was made in, I want to say it was 94. It said 94 on the listing where I got them from on eBay before getting them and turning them into magnets. But really, so within a couple of years of this being made, they got out of the first round for the only time in their existence. That's it. Haven't been out of the first round since. Like, no appearances in round 2 for Florida. It's amazing. It's really, really amazing that they've done that for that long. All right, so with Florida at number 3, who's number 2 and who's number 1? Misery over the last decade. Number 2, the Edmonton Oilers. I don't know what to say about this other than, yeah, that's about right. A lot of first round number 1 draft picks, a lot of stops and starts. It now feels like with McDavid and Draisaitl, with the forward group that they've got, that maybe they're finally ready to consistently make the playoffs and pull themselves down from this spot at number 2 on the misery index. But Oiler fans were very upset over how things were headed after that 2017 run where it looked like maybe they were finally going to be a contender, and then they fell back again. And we'll see whether or not they can get back into the hunt next year and really get over the hump. They need to have back-to-back seasons of being pretty darn good. I understand that losing to Chicago, and it's part of the reason they're number 2 is, that loss to Chicago, those are points. I understand that might make people upset, but their regular season was pretty good. They were pretty high up in the standings at the time of the pause. You don't want to throw out the baby with the bathwater. Number 1, it had to be Buffalo, right? So when I factored everything in, I went over 10 years of numbers, and I added everything up, and I saw that Pittsburgh was number 31 on a misery index, meaning they're not miserable. And number 1 was Buffalo, and number 2 was Edmonton. I went, yeah. There is a reason why Jack Eichel every year we speculate. So is he going to want out? Because it just feels like Buffalo continually spins their wheels. Buffalo fans frustrated. There's the famous call by Dwayne venting his frustration about the Buffalo Sabres, the Pagulas, and the overall mismanagement of the franchise. It is alarming. It is alarming that a fan base that is so loyal seemingly gets treated so badly, and that the franchise doesn't reward that really loyal fan base that buy so many tickets for so many crappy teams that they don't seem to make any improvements. So maybe this is finally the year now with Kevin Adams as the general manager. Maybe this is it. But I remember when Jason Botterill took over and there was, hey, this is it. Botterill's going to get her done. And it just didn't happen. So hopefully Boston or Buffalo turns it around and ends up much lower than first on the next misery index, whether that's a year from now or 2 years from now. Of course, if we don't have a season, I can't do one next year because that wouldn't make much sense. Unless I do different misery indexes for different decades and whatnot. We'll see. If I have to go a whole year making video topics, there's going to be some weird video topics along the way. But anyways, there you go. There's the list. Misery index from 2010, 2011 till 2019, 2020. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below as always. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe if you're browsing your way through. You just happened upon this video. Thank you guys so much for watching, for all your support. I will talk to you again soon.